Nations do not always die to the thunder of cannons. Sometimes there is no sound at all. No marching boots echoing through streets, no shells screaming through the sky, no final battle where flags are lowered and armies surrender. Sometimes empires collapse in silence. They die seated at desks instead of battlefields, surrounded not by soldiers but by ledgers, contracts, and ink-stained papers. In the 19th century, the greatest power of the Middle East did not fall to invading armies. It was dismantled line by accountants. It was conquered not by gunpowder, but by compound interest. This is the story of the first true debt trap of the modern age. It is the story of how the Ottoman Empire, a state that had terrified Europe for centuries, was slowly strangled by the financial institutions of London and Paris. It is a warning that still echoes in the modern world because it reveals a brutal and uncomfortable geopolitical truth. You do not need to invade a country to control it. You only need to control its debt. Once you own a nation's obligations, you own its future, its choices, and eventually its sovereignty. In the middle of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire still appeared enormous to the outside world. On maps, it remained a giant. Its borders stretched from the Balkans deep into southeastern Europe, across the mountains and plains of Anatolia, down to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and across the deserts and coastlines of North Africa. From Istanbul, the Sultan ruled over millions of subjects and sat at one of the most important crossroads of global trade, where Europe, Asia, and Africa met. Diplomats still bowed. Foreign visitors still marveled at the scale. On the surface, imperial power remained. Beneath it, the foundations were already crumbling. The empire was economically sick, and the illness had been spreading for decades. While Britain and France were transforming themselves through the Industrial Revolution, building factories, steam engines, railroads, iron ships, and mechanized industries, the Ottoman economy remained trapped in a largely medieval structure. It was overwhelmingly agrarian. It depended on peasants working small plots of land and craftsmen producing goods by hand. These people were being forced to compete in a world that had shifted to machines, mass production, and industrial efficiency. They could not win that race. The imperial treasury was perpetually empty. The state's finances relied on an outdated tax system that functioned through tax farming and local intermediaries. Corruption was endemic. Provincial officials routinely skimmed enormous portions of revenue before it ever reached Istanbul. By the time money arrived at the capital, little remained. The state struggled constantly to pay soldiers, maintain infrastructure, and govern its vast territories. For centuries, the Ottomans had survived financial crises using traditional methods. When money ran short, they debased the currency, reducing the silver content of coins. When that was not enough, they confiscated the wealth of powerful officials or disgraced elites. These solutions had worked in a pre-industrial world, but the 19th century was unforgiving. International trade, global finance, and modern warfare demanded stability, credibility, and capital. Medieval tricks no longer worked. To survive, the empire needed money, large amounts of it. It needed a modern army to defend itself against the rapidly expanding Russian Empire to the north. It needed railways, roads, telegraph lines, ports, and factories. It needed to look and act like a modern European power if it hoped to be treated as one. But modernization without industrialization is expensive, and the Ottomans had no internal capital to fund it. For a long time, Ottoman rulers resisted borrowing from the West. There was deep religious hostility toward usury, and borrowing at interest from Christian powers was seen as morally dangerous. There was also a political fear. Once you become financially dependent, you become politically vulnerable. But in 1853, resistance collapsed under pressure. Russia invaded Ottoman territory, igniting the Crimean War. The conflict was vast, expensive, and brutal. The Ottomans could not afford to fight it alone. Britain and France intervened, not out of love for the Ottomans, but out of fear of Russian expansion. They sent fleets to the Black Sea and armies to Ottoman soil. Alongside generals and admirals came bankers and financiers. War is not only fought with weapons, it is fought with credit. The Crimean War drained the Ottoman treasury at an astonishing pace. Soldiers needed wages, weapons had to be manufactured, fortifications required supplies, ships needed coal and crews. Sultan Abdülmecid II faced a terrifying reality. His advisors told him there was no alternative left. In 1854, the Ottoman Empire signed its first foreign loan agreement with British and French financiers. It was presented as a lifeline from allies. In truth, it was the first link in a chain that would tighten for a century. The loan terms were harsh and deeply unequal. Ottoman bonds were issued at 80, meaning that for every $100 the empire promised to repay, it received only $80 in cash. The remaining $20 vanished into commissions, fees, and risk premiums for the banks. Yet interest was charged on the full $100. The Ottomans were borrowing expensive money while receiving far less than they owed. From the very beginning, the mathematics guaranteed trouble. Still, when the gold arrived in Istanbul, it felt like salvation. Soldiers were paid, supplies were purchased, the immediate crisis eased, Russia was defeated, and the war ended. The Sultan experienced relief and temptation. He had learned a dangerous lesson. With a signature on a document in London or Paris, he could summon money from across the sea. The war ended in 1856, but borrowing did not. Ottoman elites had tasted easy credit, and they quickly became dependent on it. They looked to Europe with a mixture of admiration and envy. Paris glowed with gaslit boulevards. London displayed unmatched industrial power. The Ottoman court felt inferior. Instead of investing borrowed money in factories, education, irrigation, or productive infrastructure, they spent it on appearances. Nothing symbolized this obsession with prestige more than Dolmabahce Palace. Sultan Abdülmecid abandoned the old Topkapi Palace, the seat of Ottoman power for centuries, declaring it outdated and too Asian. He wanted something European, something modern, something that could rival Versailles and impress visiting monarchs. The result was breathtaking and disastrous. Dolmabahce Palace overflowed with luxury. Tons of gold leaf covered its ceilings. Silk carpets lined its halls. Italian marble adorned its walls. The largest crystal chandelier in the world hung above its grand staircase. Every element screamed wealth and power. But all of it was purchased with borrowed money. While peasants in Anatolia struggled to survive with wooden plows and failed harvests, crystal was imported from Bohemia and gold from France to decorate a palace the empire could not afford. The cost equaled roughly a quarter of the empire's entire annual tax revenue. To pay for it, the Sultan returned again and again to European banks, each loan deeper than the last. By the 1860s, Ottoman finances resembled a classic Ponzi scheme. New loans were taken simply to pay interest on old ones. Debt service consumed more and more of the budget. In 1860, about 15% of state income went to debt payments. By 1870, it exceeded 50%. Half of every coin collected from fishermen in the Aegean, farmers in Syria, and merchants in Anatolia flowed directly out of the empire to foreign creditors. With no money left, the government turned to local moneylenders known as the Galata bankers, borrowing at interest rates that reached 20% or more. It was financial suicide. Sultan Abdulaziz, who succeeded his brother, made matters worse. Obsessed with military prestige, he built one of the largest navies in the world, on paper. The ships were modern and impressive, but the empire could not afford to fuel or maintain them. They rusted in harbor, unmanned and idle, floating monuments to debt. The collapse came in 1873. A global financial panic began in Vienna and spread across Europe, freezing international capital markets. At the same time, drought devastated Anatolia. Crops failed, livestock died, famine spread through the countryside. Tax collectors entered villages and found hunger, dust, and graves. In 1875, the Ottoman government admitted defeat. Debt payments were cut in half. In diplomatic language, it was called a moratorium. In financial reality, it was bankruptcy. Europe erupted in outrage. Middle-class investors in Britain and France saw their savings evaporate. Political support for the Ottomans vanished overnight. Sensing weakness, Russia attacked again in 1877. The Ottomans were defeated, lost vast territories, and were forced to pay massive war indemnities. The empire was now completely insolvent. In 1881, European powers made a calculated decision. They would not conquer Ottoman lands with armies. Instead, they would conquer its economy. Through the Decree of Muharrem, they created the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. It was not an Ottoman institution. It was a foreign-controlled corporation. It seized control of taxes on salt, tobacco, silk, fishing, alcohol, and stamps. Armed tax collectors answered not to the Sultan, but to European banks. One-third of the empire's revenue flowed directly abroad. The Sultan ruled in name only. If he wanted to build a road, a school, or a hospital, he needed banker approval. Later, Germany entered the game, offering partnership and investment. It financed the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, promising modernization, but the contracts guaranteed profits and granted mineral rights along the tracks. The Ottomans simply exchanged one set of chains for another. By World War I, debt had become a weapon. Desperate to break free, the Ottomans sided with Germany, hoping victory would erase their obligations. They expelled foreign debt officials and stopped payments. For a moment, they felt free. The gamble failed. The empire collapsed, but the debt lived on. When the Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923, European powers demanded payment. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk resisted but ultimately accepted restructuring. The final installment was paid in 1954, 100 years after the first loan. The Ottoman Empire did not die of old age. It was foreclosed. This is the ultimate lesson of financial dependency. Loans are never neutral. Every bond is a chain. Sovereignty is not only about borders and flags, it is about solvency. If you do not own your debt owns you.